he called in and he was laughing with a listener. And they were having a good little jovial conversation. And I cut him off and I said, folks, that's the real Nick Saban right there. The guy who's talking to Billy in Mobile here on the phone, that's the real Nick Saban. I said, he's just a nice guy. As opposed to the man you see behind the podium on Mondays and Wednesdays. And he said, so you're saying to me, he interrupted me, he said, you're saying to me that I'm a schmuck when I'm on the podium. I said, well, your word, not mine, but...
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. I'm here with AL.com Alabama football writer Michael Casagrande, and we're back with another edition of the Golden Age, and we're here with the man himself, the legendary Eli Gold. Eli, how you doing?
I am well. Good to be back with everybody this week.
Today we're going to go behind the scenes again with Hey Coach, Nick Saban's weekly radio show, which you hosted.
Yes, for his entire tenure, and I enjoyed it. And I think we mentioned earlier in the season, he genuinely enjoyed doing that show. You know, it kind of sounds a little strange because, you know, a lot of the fans watch the sound bites from his Monday and Wednesday press conferences. And there he would stand behind the podium and he'd make a short little comment. And then he'd start tapping his fingers on the podium or on the side of the podium. He was kind of nudgy. He wanted to get out of there.
Guys like this were asking boring questions.
Me all day. Yeah, you want to get out of there.
Yeah. Exactly. But he genuinely enjoyed the Thursday night talk show. And I have heard that from so many. From his secretary, from Miss Terry, from so many people. He loved getting out of the office at the end of the week. He loved schmoozing with the fans. We usually had a very, very good media person as the third member of the panel, and he enjoyed that. So, yeah, we had a great time on Thursday nights. We sure did.
I think the context of all this is kind of important. Can you explain to people how rare this is in this day and age that there's still a live call-in show?
Yeah, most coaches, maybe it has changed in the last year, I don't know, but certain schools have 4 coaches shows a year, you know, like one a month during the season, you know, maybe a preseason show in August, one in September, October, November, and December, so 4 or 5 shows. For a myriad of reasons, Alabama has one every week and forever and ever, amen. Number one, yes, it's good business and there's interest, so there's advertising money being sold, and you can't overlook that. The commercials pay the rent. That's one item. But number two, the interest level is sky high. And, you know, some schools don't have them at all. Like I said, some schools do 4 or 5 shows. Some have none whatsoever. Everything is different. But yeah, we did 2 shows without Coach Saban to kind of get folks back into the habit of tuning in on Thursday nights. So the 2 Thursdays before the season, we had shows without the coach, and then he was with us every Thursday, except for Thanksgiving week, when we moved the show to Wednesday, obviously. We also did a show on the off week when the coach joined us from his lake house on the telephone, but he was still on the show. And then, of course, the postseason, you did shows from the postseason venue, wherever that might be. So, yeah, he enjoyed it, and we did as well.
I think you're right that he loosened up. He seemed relaxed. And it wasn't as regimented as everything else is in his schedule. But how do you keep Nick Saban loose in a format like that? Because he's got such a reputation as a serious guy. But his players and other people who know him well, like you, they've said that he's got a great sense of humor. And so how do you feel like that show, you managed to show off more of his personality?
Well, I don't know if it was me per se. It was the fact that the university's mouthpiece was hosting the show. He knew that we were not going to throw him under the bus. You know, we did not avoid major subjects or topics. We did not. You couldn't. You lose your credit. The only thing you got in this business is your ability and your credibility. And if you lose either one of those, you know, you're out of luck. So we couldn't avoid a controversial subject, but it's how you approached things. And you know, even when when there was a question who'd be starting at quarterback, you know, instead of saying, as Michael might have, and I don't mean this in a bad way, he would say, "Coach, you know, it's Thursday. You know, who's going to start at quarterback?" And you know, instead of him saying it like that, you know, I would say something like, "Oh, Coach, have you settled on your starting lineup for Saturday?" Very small little nuances, but that would give him the right to talk about his right tackle, his left guard, yes, if he wanted to, his quarterback, whatever. So I would give him a little wiggle room in the phrasing of the question, because I knew he would wiggle and get out of it. So I wouldn't necessarily put him on the spot, but we could not avoid, you know, asking those questions. I just phrased it a little bit differently than the mainline media guy who had to write a column or an article as soon as he got done.
What about the callers?
The callers were great. I think in however many years, well, 17 or so with him, and I think in all those years going back before him, I think we hit the dump button. You know, the show's on a delay. Once or twice, somebody got really rude, and you couldn't see it on the air, but behind the lip of the set that we had, there was a red button there. And if I had to, I could hit it, and you know, you just keep on going. It's difficult to explain exactly how it works, but it works. But you know, there were a couple, 3, 4, 5 times where, you know, somebody would say the S word.
Who would that somebody be?
The coach. And I just did not, you know, I didn't bleep him.
Didn't dump Nick. Yeah, you didn't.
No,
you don't dump the coach.
I don't dump the coach. It's his show. But no, the fans were very respectful, and he liked, for the most part, the knowledgeable fan and the knowledgeable question. Okay, you know, he didn't necessarily he could laugh about it, but you know, he wasn't big on what's your favorite, you know, flavor of cupcake. You know, he wasn't big on that. But you know, when Pee Wee would call in from Grand Bay, and always have a well thought out, meaty question, always about the offensive line. That was Pee Wee's thing, but he respected that because Pee Wee knew what he was talking about, and he asked a solid question. The coach just loved, and what folks didn't see who weren't at the restaurant is that during the commercial breaks, the coach would be gone from the stage. He'd be walking around the restaurant, taking pictures, signing autographs, not just for the people in the best seat in the house right there in front of the stage, but, you know, we'd be back on the air for the next segment. And, you know, he'd be over there, you know, shooting the breeze with somebody. And that's part of his deal. Those call-in shows are a 1 hour or an hour and a half, whatever it is, a 1 hour commercial for the university and for the coach. So they use it, and nobody has done that better than Nick Saban. He used that time to get his messages across to his players, to his coaches, to players' families, and yes, to the fans.
Gotta ask, what did they say to get dumped out? What did this caller say?
Oh, it was not. It was just it was the one guy dropped the F-bomb.
Ooh.
And whether he did it deliberately or whether that was part of his vocabulary, You know, what the F were you thinking? You know, and you just can't do that.
No.
You know, the S word is a little more acceptable.
It's contextual.
Yeah, but when you say, Coach, what were you thinking about? That's one thing. If you say, what the F were you thinking about? But really we didn't use that button much at all, but it was there. Every show nowadays is on delay.
Yeah.
We're all running 7 seconds behind, so we do have time to, on a live show, you do have time to make that edit.
Michael, were you ever a media guest on the Saban Show?
One time,
Okay.
I was an emergency fill-in. I don't know if I was the most popular media member around there, believe it or not. So I was never.
You weren't asked back, huh?
No, I wasn't, and that was my first year. It was my first year. It's 2009. I think they asked me on a Wednesday for somebody obviously canceled.
Yeah.
And no, it's okay. I wasn't hurt. I didn't need that. I had plenty to do on Thursday nights. So
I hear you. But yeah, I didn't make the pick on the media guests either.
oh, we all know who makes the pick.
Yeah. But that was told to me, and such will be the media. And some of those shows were made by the media guest. When Vern Lundquist was on, when guys of that nature were on, he opened up even more. And these were two guys in their, 60s or early 70s, and they were just sitting around like a couple of buddies at the bar shooting the breeze. And man, I was smart enough just to hush up.
Oh yeah,
Just let them go.
if Tom Rinaldi, Nick Saban's favorite, was on, he
Yes,
loved that guy, and they
he
could
did.
just
And they would tell great stories.
Yeah. How cognizant are you of Saban's time when you're hosting that show? Because, he was so regimented during an active football season. He walks in at 7 p.m., he plants down, he answers questions, he gives his final word, and then he rolls out of there at about 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Was it a pressure cooker kind of keeping that on track?
Not really. No, I've had no problem. I had what you couldn't see on the air is that next to that red button was a small, the mini version of an iPad, and it was synced up to a GPS clock, because on radio or TV you've got to go at the right second, and you got to wrap it up at 58 minutes and 50 seconds into the hour. It gives the station 10 seconds for a station ID, a 1-minute commercial break, and then they're on to their next show. So you've got to be punctual. So I had this little iPad right here that you couldn't see, but again, it kept clicking. And so it was no problem. The only thing I did do for that last word of the coaches, sometimes he would go very briefly. Sometimes he would go forever. And there were a couple of times where I had to hustle to get us off the air, because I am subservient to that clock. So I would end up backing up his final word. Instead of going to it at 7:53, I'd go to it at 7:51. And then if we had more time, I'd fill on the back end after I dismissed him for the evening. So you always, but if he would, if it was a normal show, I went to that final break at 53. It was a 3-minute commercial break to 56, and I was out at 58. With the music, I was out at 58:50.
He'd get pretty fired up during the final word sometimes, too.
Oh, yeah.
They drop some of those
S words.
Some of those nice words that you mentioned. I mean, you just sit back and relax and enjoy that when you're hosting
yeah.
something like that. And you're
Yeah.
just thinking, man, this is good stuff.
Oh, I'm thinking it's good stuff, no doubt. Because I'm a broadcaster, but number two, I'm a big fan. So I'm hearing all this stuff was really good. But yeah, when I had no idea what his final word was going to be. He just knew it was coming up, and I went, and that was that.
Not to belabor the S word too much, but what would happen if you look out into the crowd? What would his wife, what would Terry Saban look like when he would?
I don't know. I never really noticed.
She never gave him like a look like you shouldn't do that.
She probably did at times, but to say that, you got to be cognizant. He drops the S-bomb if I just immediately looked to Miss Terry to get her reaction, it would look really weird.
Yes, that's true.
Hey, she's wearing the pants in the family or something.
I couldn't be able to resist if I.
No. I just.
That's why I was never the media guest.
Yeah.
Probably.
But no, I never. And she and I did look at each other on occasion when he made some interesting football comment, or he'd ask. He said, Miss Terry can tell you, such and such, and I'd look at her, and she'd nod, because she would sit right there.
Oh, yeah.
Every show we did with him, whether it was at home at Baumhauer's, whether it was on the road, she was front and center within easy sight lines of the coach. She was, she'd back him up. They were a team. But no, I didn't necessarily stare. And actually, he sat to my right with the media guest in between. Miss Terry was a little bit back here to my left. So, for me to have... I'd have to kind of really do that. So I didn't.
Fair enough.
Let's take a quick break. This is the Golden Age on Beat Everyone. We're here with Eli Gold talking about Hey Coach and going behind the scenes, learning a little bit more about what Nick Saban was like on his weekly radio show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Beat Everyone. This is the Golden Age. We're here with Eli Gold. We're talking about Hey Coach, the Nick Saban radio show. Every Thursday night, you would see Nick Saban just kind of cut loose a little bit. Not the Nick Saban that we were all kind of accustomed to seeing during the week, especially during a stressful football season where this guy's trying to win games, win championships. I want to know what you remember about Nick Saban walking through the door at 7 p.m. right on the dot. He's driven up to the entrance of Baumhauer's or wherever he is.
Yep.
You kind of felt a jolt of electricity from the crowd a little bit. You'd hear the audio. It was on radio, obviously, but you would hear, people start clapping, yelling. There he is. Nick Saban's in the room. That meant it was showtime, right?
It did. Not with no disrespect to the first half hour, when you might have been sitting there with the volleyball coach, the rowing coach. The first half hour, the Hey Coach portion, was part of the deal where every coach at the university got time on the air to talk to the fans and what have you. So, but when Coach Saban walked in, everything ramped up just a little bit. But he was the star of the show. He was the guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. And he'd sit down, and I'd always tell the media guests, I said, look, what's going to happen when he gets here? And I said, and sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes he'd be late. He'd get a hair cut often times before the show, or he'd have whatever it was. The day ran a little bit long. I said, if he's not here, you and I will just shoot the breeze and talk about whatever.
Vamp a little bit.
Yeah, we'll vamp. That's no problem filling, getting. And I'd often ask the media guest how they prepare for the week. How much do you have to write? What's this? What's that? What have you? Whether it was an electronic guy or a print guy, so we'd fill. But usually he was, very, very punctual. He'd pull up sometimes outside at, 7 minutes till the hour. I'd look and see the car out there, and he'd be sitting in the car eating a sandwich. And, and then he'd have the radio on probably in the car. So just as the opening theme rolled for the Nick Saban show portion, he'd walk in. But yeah, he carried with him a lot of energy, like he does anywhere when he walks into the room. He owns the room. But he was easy to work with. I prepared for my week as though Thursday night were game time. I wanted my charts to be done, my notes to be done. Yes, I was going to be there on Friday, but I had stuff to do, and the game was Saturday. And I wanted anything that came up on Thursday night in the conversation with the coach, I wanted to be able to add to it if I could. Whatever the subject matter was. Even if he happened to say, and of course they got that great tackle there, number 52, and he knew guys by numbers, not necessarily by name.
Right.
And I'd say, yeah, that's, Joe Blow, the kid from such and such who did, and I'd have that on my chart in front of me. So I was ready Thursday night to do a game. let alone just the talk show.
And I appreciated the radio show because so many ideas, so many stories I've written. The idea germinated from an answer he gave in
Sure.
the show. I think there was one of my favorite ones I wrote was about the communication on headsets between
Yeah.
coaches, and it came to mind because of an answer he gave on that radio show, and became a long project. It took a long time to write, but some of the most interesting things that came out of the whole week would come from that radio show and not from talking to the slobs like me on a Monday.
And it wasn't my questions necessarily. I mean, it wasn't me. It was the fans. It was the people at the restaurant who'd come up and ask questions. It would be the callers. We had an AL.com Nick Saban show blog that gave us some very good input. So the questioners, I always talk about, people say, what are the best interviews you've ever done in life? They've asked me, I get that. And I'll say, one was Eddie Robinson, the football coach at Grambling, and one was John Wooden, the great basketball coach at UCLA. And I would say to the people, and I said, and trust me, it wasn't because of my questions. It was because of their answers. And oftentimes I would obviously just play off of their answer or what have you. So same thing with the coach and with the fans. You never know where the great stuff that we just don't even think about because we're almost too close to
Right.
things. Hey, I didn't even know you wondered about that.
I like to think of the AL.com blog as playing a pretty pivotal role in the history of that show. So I'm glad you plugged that, Eli. I appreciate it. What was it like to sort of improv with Saban? Like, what kind of radio partner was he? Because people hang on to every word that guy says, and like he's great content for what we do and what ESPN does, and obviously for the show. But you don't really know what he's going to say in a setting
No.
like that. Again, it's fairly loose and conversational, and you've got to keep the banter going to sort of entertain the audience.
Yeah.
So, what kind of partner was he?
He was very good. He was aware. The guy's a good broadcaster, and we're going to see more and more of that as the season rolls on. We've already seen it through his coverage of the draft and so on, and he's very, very good. And I knew he would he'd give me a little grief in a funny way. He said to me once years ago, he said, "You understand, I'm just messing with you." I said, "Sure, I know, don't worry about it." And that was years ago. And I cut him off. I might have told you this. He called in and he was laughing with a listener, and they were having a good little jovial conversation, and I cut him off and I said, "Folks, that's the real Nick Saban right there. The guy who's talking to Billy in Mobile here on the phone, that's the real Nick Saban." I said, "He's just a nice guy." As opposed to the man you see behind the podium on Mondays and Wednesdays. And he said, "So you're saying to me," he interrupted me, he said, "you're saying to me that I'm a schmuck when I'm on the podium." I said, "Well, your word, not mine," but but he was a good radio partner. He understood, and he knew we had to take breaks and what have you. He was not oblivious because there was money changing hands to do that show. Whether he kept it or it went to the Knicks Kids Foundation, there was money transferring, so he understood we had to take breaks and do it. But he was a very, very good radio partner.
Was there ever a moment when you got cut and he wasn't happy with you? Would he ever?
No, not that I can think of.
That's good.
Not that I can think of.
Yeah, was there any sense of like walking on eggshells, I guess? Because again, the season is stressful, and
Yeah.
he is in go mode,
Yes.
right? And so I just wonder, like, I always thought it was funny when like a kid or a fan or even sometimes a reporter in some cases would ask things like, about the depth chart, how many points are we going to beat this team by?
Yeah.
When are you going to put the backups in against Western Kentucky?
Yeah.
Things like that. And like, I just wonder, like, did you ever think like, okay, let's not upset Nick Saban here because, he could go off at any second?
No, I didn't think that because I knew I was not going to upset him. And, the show belongs to the listener. This show belongs to the viewers. It's not your show.
Well,
It's not your show.
A little bit all of our shows.
It's not my show. this show belongs to the folks who take the time and have the interest and care enough to click and download or just whatever. And the same thing with the Nick Saban show. Yeah, it may have his name on it, but the show belonged to the listener. It belonged to the fans, and he understood that. So it was rare. It was rare that he would jump on a listener. A couple of times he might have gotten his hackles up a little bit, but you could tell that if it was you who would ask the question or you, he would have drilled you. But he didn't do that to the fans. He was very respectful.
There were times when I could tell the phone calls were going long, and there were people who were rambling a little bit,
Yeah.
and you could, when it was on the feed, there would be a live camera on them, and you could see if there was like a heart monitor or there was a heart rate monitor,
Yeah.
you could see it like rising, and it was like you couldn't understand what they were saying. It was sort of like get to the point.
Yeah,
And it's like from asking Nick Saban questions over the years, I know the fewest words were the best
exactly.
to get to the point. And people were going on monologues, and they were probably nervous.
Sure.
Could you sense him?
Oh yeah, I could sense that, and he'd shoot me a quick little glance out of the corner of his eye, and but I hated to cut a guy off.
Yeah.
You had to at least, and like some of those callers, most were very, very, very good, but some just didn't come up for a breath, and I didn't want to cut them off in mid-sentence, so they would get to a point, and then I would jump in and I'd say, Coach, he's obviously concerned about the linebackers, and I just condensed the whole thing. But I could tell that the show belonged to the listener, and I made sure they had their say.
Y'all mentioned Terry Saban earlier,
Yes.
and she was in the audience, like you said, like every episode, pretty much.
Yes.
Just curious, as just sort of a follow-up, what do you remember about Miss Terry?
God, I love her to death. A great lady, very caring. She was like the team mom, and she was very, very, good to me and to my wife and daughter. As far as just conversing and shooting the breeze, and I would run stuff past her. We were doing something. Remember those things that Bama used to do? It was called the Crimson Caravan. That's where we traveled all across the country. Seattle, Chicago, New York City, everywhere, within the state as well, but also all over the country. And we, communed with 1,500 to 2,000 Bama fans. We'd go to Dallas, and it was a great time. But one year, we were putting the show together, the run of the show, and I stumbled across a video of John Tesh. You know John Tesh, the musician
Absolutely.
who does the NBA,
Pianist.
the hard rock
Genius?
thing.
Yeah, that's the word, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
Great hair.
Yeah, he's outstanding. Well, he did a live concert somewhere on the West Coast, and I don't know how I found it even, or why I was looking, and I love that tune. And I said, yeah, I want to listen to that. So I punched it up on my computer, and there they were. I think it was at Red Rocks or somewhere. And anyway, he's doing the song in concert with his full orchestra and the whole bit. Then during one of the instrumental areas of it, here came two guys out onto the stage. It's a true story. Two guys came out onto the stage, one of whom was wearing a crimson sports jacket. Well, I'll be a son of a gun if that guy wasn't an identical twin to Nick Saban. You can look it up. The guy was an identical twin to Nick Saban. And I'm staring at the TV, at the monitor. And I said, I've got to use that in our show at the Crimson Caravan. And I wondered, well, should I? Is he going to take offense? I said, well, who can I call? So I called Miss Terry. And I sent her the clip. And I got a text back. She goes, "Oh, my God." She goes, "Sure, you can use that." He said, "He'll jump on your case, but you can use it." So I use it, and we're at whatever the opening show was, I forget. And at those Crimson Caravans, we were up on the stage, but in front of us, down on the floor level, was a monitor, a video monitor, so we could see what was on the big screens behind us, just if we had to reference something. And I get up there and I said, "Hey folks, you're here on a good night." I said, "Because Coach Saban is with us," and of course he's always with us, But I said, when he's not coaching football, he's a guitarist for John Tesh. John Tesh, and and the coach is just sitting there, and he's just shaking his head and just wondering where the heck is this going. And I said, "Yeah," I said, he travels with John Tesh, plays a very mean guitar. If you've not seen it, as a matter of fact, and I'd say to somebody in the back, who of course was part of our crew, I said, "Do we have access to that tape?" And I know it was queued up, ready to go. And they play it, and here comes this guy who looks just like Nick Saban in a crimson sports jacket. He's Tesh's regular guitarist, but it was bizarre how much, well, everybody loved it. It brought the house down. And he was laughing, and so I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, because John Tesh has the night off tonight, we're blessed to have with us Coach Nick Saban." Coach, and he'd come up, and I was getting ready to sit down in my chair on the stage. Well, he grabbed the lower edge of my sports jacket, as if to say, "Don't go anywhere." So I stood there. "Coach, it's all yours, sir." He said, "Hey, that's good to see you." I said, "You're a funny guy." I said, "I try." He said, "You still working for NASCAR?" I said, "Yes, Coach, I sure am. 41 years now." He goes, "Good, don't give up your only job." As though he was going to, and people would call. Folks would find, I had an office number in the phone book in those days, and phone books tells you how long ago it was. But I had an office number, and folks would call, or they'd know us, and they'd call my wife and says, "Did Eli get himself in trouble last night by picking on Nick?" And she said, "No." I said, "That was all prearranged, pre-planned." But that was part of Miss Terry. I could call her, getting back to your original question, I could call her and bounce stuff off of her.
Imagine how mad he'd be if you kind of picture of him shark fishing,
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The other.
Eli, you always used to give Nick Saban the final word on that radio show. I'm going to give you the final word on hosting Hey Coach, the last word on what you remember, what you liked about doing it.
What I loved about doing it is it made for a better broadcast for us on Saturday. I learned so much from Nick Saban. I learned about life. I learned about how to treat people in all different ways. I learned about football. I'm not a football guru. Yeah, I know my football, but not like these guys. And I learned so much from Nick Saban. And he was just a genuinely wonderful man. He was a wonderful guy. I loved working with him and for him. And you had to be on your P's and Q's. You had to do well. He didn't abide by stupid questions from me or from anybody. But I loved doing the show, and it was a good chance for me to just sit around with him and shoot the breeze a little bit. And it allowed me to get a further glimpse inside the program. I was always lucky. I had access, but this was just another step in that. And it was a great time.
Eli, awesome as always. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
We'll do it again real soon. If you have a question for Eli, please leave us a voicemail at 205-523-4809. Subscribe to Beat Everyone on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And for Michael Casagrande and Eli Gold, I'm Ben Flanagan. Thanks so much. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.